Oh, okay. So I've been wanting to tell my DNA story for a while, because it's a little crazy, and there's a lot of people out there like me. Uh, See, I don't know how to go about telling the story. I really don't. I don't know where to start. I guess I should start. Um, I guess in 2015, 2016, I bought Ancestry DNA test. Just because I've always been kind of interested in like genealogy and like where my family came from and wanting to know more. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I wonder what it's going to show me. I'm into things like that, right? So I take this test and I get the results back and it shows me the results. And it's saying that I'm like 30% English, 10% Irish, and like 34% Native American. I was like, oh wow, I guess it's true. We all have those stories about Native American being in our family. I had a bunch of other stuff in there too. I can show that, but I don't have it right now. I don't have that sheet of paper that tells me what I am. But those are the majority, the big majorities of what I am. So like a lot of people here in America are told, oh, we're Native American. You always hear that, and like people either they believe it or they think, is it true? Like it could be true. Who knows? How can we prove that it's true? Well, here's a DNA test telling me that I'm like 34% Native American. I was like, oh, that's different. And I was like, what side of my family does that come to? From. And so I start to do the tree a little bit further. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't come from my dad's side. It looks like they're pretty straightforward, like straight up to the Mayflower almost. Uh, it's not Native American there. So what about my mom? And, my mom really wasn't showing that either. So it was a curiosity to me, like, where's this big chunk of Native American coming from? Um, and then a little bit later, I don't know how long, uh, they updated their service to where it showed like like the regions where your ethnicities are coming from, where it traces back, and it's showing Mexico. Like Mexico. I know my dad is not from Mexico. He's like pretty standard white guy, right? Uh and this is in like 2017 or something, right? And I was 29, 30 years old. I'm like, what's going on here? Maybe it was like 31. Yeah. I think it was about 31. I was like, what's happening? Mexico? And then I had a thought. I did not have a typical childhood. I did not. Um, my stepdad was an alcoholic, and my mom, was she an alcoholic? Not really. I mean, maybe. She liked to drink a little bit, okay? But it wasn't like an everyday kind of thing. And if it was, then she hit it really well. So I would go to bars with my mom and my stepdad, and sometimes just with my mom and my older sister, who was 18 years older than me. So she had every right to go into a bar. And like, I kind of grew up going to bars occasionally. And so I remember I've known about this. It's not something I could forget. I mean, how could you forget this? Um, Story within a story, right? Um, so I was inside of this bar with my mom and my older sister, and I was 13, 14. Okay, I had to have been 14 or 15 years old. And this bar, and it's like a little country bar. It's not like a big like party bar or whatever. It's just like it's a VFW, if you know what that is. And I'm sitting there with my mom, listening to the music on the jukebox, drinking my cherry coke, which is what I got when I went to the bars with my mom. And so this man walks up to me. This Mexican man walked up to me and my mom sitting next to me, and he goes, "Oh, hey, Luana." That's my mom's name. Uh she's like, "Oh, is this Becky?" And And she said, yeah. And he goes, oh, it's Becky. He looks at me, this drunk man. He says, oh, I'm your dad. He's Hispanic. And he has a very strong accent. And he says, Becky, I'm your dad. I'm your dad. And so I was like, no, you're not. And I look at my mom, and she doesn't give me any confirmation or denies it at all. And so I'm like, what is this man talking about? He's crazy. Like I'm very light skinned. I have like colored eyes. This man had green eyes, and he has light complexion, but he had a really strong accent. And his skin was, a little darker, a little tan, heavy accent. I did not believe him. And that wasn't the only time. He would approach me sometimes be in the bar because I was there a few more times with my mom, and every time he'd show up throughout the last couple years. Um, I guess I saw him probably about 10 times, maybe. I really don't remember how many times, but I do definitely remember times when he would argue with me about him being my dad, and how he would argue with me about how he was my dad, and I would tell him, no, you're not. And he would say, yes, I am. How could you think that this other man is your father? Because uh, the dad, the man that I thought was my father, was much older, much, much older. And he's like, how could you think that this old man is your dad? And I was angry when he said that, because I loved the dad I thought was my dad. He was the only dad that I thought could be my dad. And my mom didn't help me. And my mom died when I was 15, so it's not really something I could confront her about anytime after that. And that's not really something I did with my mom. You don't really, and maybe I didn't want to know, okay? Like, I thought she would tell me, right? She would have told me, and she had an opportunity. He was like, hey, she's my daughter, right? That happened on several times. He confronted her. She never said yes or no. She never said yes or no. And so I didn't know what to do. And so I kind of buried it. You know, a few years go by, and I just kind of buried it. It's in the past. Although at times there's people that will walk up to me and they say, hey, do you speak Spanish? You're from Mexico, right? And I always just tell them, no, I'm not. I'm white. I'm just a white girl from America. Um, which, I mean, technically I am, right? Until this DNA test came back, and it would update further. Like, it gave like a range of where my roots came from, and it kept, like, over a few months, it kept getting smaller and smaller until where it only showed like South America and Mexico area. And I was like, oh gee, that's interesting. Maybe this guy is my father after all. My bad. It only took me like, what, 10 years? 10, 20. It only took me like 15 years. 20 years. Yeah, 20 years for me to like come to a full circle, like, oh, he is my dad. Nobody just really told me about it. And if they tried to tell me, I didn't believe them. How could you believe that you were lied to all that time, right? So I decided, because even with that proof that I'm Hispanic and my roots trace back to Mexico, Native American, Hispanic, all that kind of stuff, I still didn't believe it. But I was like, this man told me he was my father. Like, could this be true? Is he my father? I still don't believe it. Like, how? I don't think this is true. So I decided to get a paternity test with this man in 2018, because I was like, oh, well, there is this man that said he was my father. And so I decided to go. And my older sister, remember I told you, she went to the bars with us sometimes. And when I was born, and even before, my mom had dated this man, so I knew that they had dated. And that was part of the reason I didn't believe it. I just thought he had like this psychological thing stuck on my mom. And it's a lot to grasp, right? I hope I'm explaining it well. When I was born, before I was born, my mom was dating this man who says he was my father, is my father. And so my sister was around him too, right? So she knew where he lived. They kind of, I don't know the full story there, because I was only being conceived during that time, and that was in the 80s. So like, who really remembers everything that happened back then? My mom didn't, because she didn't tell me nothing. Anyway, I use humor as a coping mechanism. Uh, so I was like, hey, Donna, do you remember where he lives? And so me and my friend and my sister and my sister's ex-husband, we all took a little drive with my little paternity test. I'm like, first, before I bought it, I was like, hey, would you mind taking a paternity test? He's like, yeah, I'll take a paternity test, but you don't really need to do that because I know I'm your father. I was like, okay, let's get the test results first. So like a week or two later, I got my paternity test. I go over to his house, and I swab his my sister swabs his mouth, his cheek, and I do mine too. And we put it in a little envelope and we mail it off. And then eventually I get the test results back. And it's like 99% positive that this man is my father. So I was like, oh my God, you're my dad, you're my father. So I felt kind of bad, honestly. I felt bad because this man that I had been denying all this time was telling the truth. But it's like I couldn't deal with that for all that time, because it is traumatizing. But now we have a relationship. So, yeah, I'm going to take a moment. So